Welcome back to the Logos of Experience and Truth podcast. To those listening, as I finally get around to closing this season out with this summary, thank you for being patient. Season 2 of this podcast was a trip down memory lane, sharing the experiences I've had, witnessed, been put through, hallucinated, or however else you want to think of it, was both easy and very difficult to accomplish. Easy because I remember it so vividly, difficult because I remember it so vividly. Maybe they're the recollections of a madman, or maybe they're the recollections of one who has truly seen the mystical vision. It's obviously up to you to decide. In summary, episodes 11 and 12. The first 2 episodes were a combined effort that reviewed and told in as clear detail the things I saw, the things I thought, the things that occurred during what now I suppose would be called the psychedelic mystical experience, even though I wasn't on psychedelic drugs, unless speed is psychedelic, which I don't think it is, followed by the visionary trip to seeing hell on earth, seeing the Grim Reaper appear and knowing death was around the corner, and then experiencing what to me was death, punishment, judgment, penance, forgiveness, in that order, and then awakening back to the conscious, normal world with my eyes open to some inner, hidden yet all around me realm of reality I just witnessed. If I have not been clear, I consider this near-death experience to be a type of mystical experience, or in reverse, the mystical experience to be a type of near-death without actually physically dying. Episode 13. This episode began right where the previous 2 episodes had dumped me, as a stupefied individual that now sought answers to the experience that had just brought him face to face with death, and that the answers had been all around me, though I'd been blind to see them. I summarized several different spiritually inspired sights or visions that may or may not have been caused by psychedelic use prior to the near-death experience discussed in the first 2 episodes, along with the attitude I held that kept me safely encapsulated in ignorance, even as I was seeing telltale hints of what has been called the spiritual. Episode 14. At this point, I explain how I came to grips with each of the experiences I had prior and in addition with the near-death experience, and that it brought about a profound understanding in the first-hand experience of mysterious happenings in my life that science had taught me to ignore as the ravings of a madman, along with my complete ignorance in the knowledge, study, or understanding of anything having to do with religion, the spiritual, or God. I dive deep into the study of God in the search to understand the why and how these various visions and signs I'd witnessed had occurred, something to which even after all these years are probably the most useless of questions to ask, since there is no answer for these types of questions, though in a symbiotic manner it's seeking answers to these types of questions that leads a person to study the mysteries in the first place. Episode 15. Now, with several months of serious study under my belt, a clear and clean mind free of any and all prior drug use and the residual effects, I start having more and more experiences, more brushes against the spiritual, the synchronous, the weird, and switch gears from one of effectual psychedelic drug use speculation to full-on brushing against what has been designated as spiritual, esoteric, mystical on an almost regular basis across the span of a decade. Episode 16. In addition to the various external experiences that were bringing me closer to the spiritual that were discussed in the previous episode, I had so many eye-opening and interesting dreams that I needed to devote an entire episode to the most meaningful ones I had written down and remembered. Episode 17. This episode highlights the dangers of a newborn mind wading through both the crystal and obsidian waters of mystical literature that exist out there that can uplift or drown a newly expanding mind before they've even taken their first step. I go into the central thought I had gained in my reading and study and experience with what was called the New Age back then, that I felt was directly responsible for the next mystical experience I had that was more of a fall and punishment versus union with the Godhead, or the actual goal of mysticism. Episode 18. This episode follows the previous one by way of action. I abandoned all the teachings that told anything that resembled what led to the previous episode's experience, and instead of focusing on any and all forms of religions and spiritual teachings, I focused on one: Catholic Christianity. Something about doing this allowed my mind to zero in versus being tossed willy-nilly from one New Age spiritual book to the next, grasping in vain to the next voice's positive messages without ever actually learning or applying anything read. Episode 19. There is a span between the previous episode and the end of this one of around 12 years and encompass what I call the desert of the soul, or the gigantic period of time from one experience of God to the next that is summarized in many biblical writings of being tested and refined by God. This doesn't occur over a single night, though the dark night of the soul, when what this is meant to achieve is achieved, can happen in a single night. I read St. John of the Cross's Dark Night poem in the first episode of the podcast if you need a refresher regarding the actual mystical experience. I happen to be outlining this on Ash Wednesday 2023, and the way to think of this period of spiritual phase or time in the desert of the soul is that it is like Lent, but over many years continual, where it feels as if the signs from God, or the consolations as St. John of the Cross and St. Teresa of Avila put it, drop from the face of the earth. Episode 20. The end of the previous episode brings the podcast full circle to the first season, where I began with the mystical vision that I beheld in 2018 and that I've come to believe to have been the beatific vision. This episode speaks on various counter ideas and the paradoxes therein that lay all around and within our mind, based on the scientific idea of the paradigm of existence to which we belong, and how that dictates everything within our mind, unless, by following the mysteries or some other form of interior mental or spiritual work, we seek freedom from the paradigm governing our every thought and belief. To challenge the paradigm within is to challenge the world, the universe. Doing so prepares the soul for the mystical vision by creating an inner death. Once this inner death is truly completed, the spiritual rebirth Jesus mentions in the Gospel of John occurs almost immediately in the dark night of the soul. To be honest, this episode was kind of a rant on various microcosm and macrocosm analogies that I so very much enjoy doing for some reason. Thank you for listening. I hope this brief overview gives guidance to a potential listener on what to expect if they choose to dive into the complete episodes of Season 2. I probably won't have to do any more of these summary episodes, since the next season will be vastly more focused and shorter on each episode. Those are around the corner, so until next time.